On the night of October 15th, 2017, the town of Ravenwood, Oregon, was more lively than usual. The annual Autumn Festival drew everyone to the town square. The Harris family, like every year, couldn't miss this event. Aria Harris, the elegant wife, adjusted her light blue dress in front of the mirror, while her two daughters, Lily, 14, and Layla, 10, couldn't hide their excitement as they rushed around the house getting ready. Stephen Harris, Aria's husband, stood at the door, his eyes full of love as he watched his wife and daughters. He wore a white shirt paired with simple yet stylish jeans. The whole family was ready for a wonderful evening. At the town square, the festival was in full swing. Laughter mingled with music, creating a warm and vibrant atmosphere. The Harris family easily blended into the crowd, finding a spot with their close friends, and together they enjoyed the festival's signature dishes. The laughter of children mixed with the sounds of toasts and clinking glasses, creating a scene filled with happiness. Amidst the joyful crowd, Andrew Clark, a mysterious man who had moved to the town a few months earlier, quietly observed. He sat in a secluded corner, his cold eyes following the Harris family from a distance. Andrew didn't talk to anyone, only quietly sipped his drink, occasionally glancing at the Harris family with an inscrutable expression. When Stephen got up to fetch more water, he accidentally brushed against Andrew. The moment passed quickly, but Andrew's gaze lingered on Stephen for longer. Stephen smiled lightly and continued walking, not paying much attention to the strange man. The festival continued with lively activities, but something about Andrew made those who noticed him feel uneasy. His cold and mysterious gaze was hard to ignore, but no one really gave it much thought. Aria Harris, however, felt a vague sense of unease when she looked in Andrew's direction, but she quickly brushed it off to focus on enjoying the evening with her family. Around 9:30 p.m., Aria, worried that the children needed rest, decided to leave the festival early. Stephen wanted to stay and chat with friends, so he encouraged his wife and daughters to head home first, promising to return after the festival ended. Before leaving, Aria glanced in Andrew's direction once more, sensing an inexplicable unease, but she said nothing. As the three of them left the square, Andrew remained seated, taking one last sip of his drink, his eyes still following them. He knew the moment he had been waiting for had arrived that night. As the festival continued with laughter and conversation, no one in the town of Ravenwood knew that the Harris family was on the brink of a terrible danger. Andrew Clark, the man no one noticed, was quietly preparing for a night of horror. A faint, mocking smile played on his lips as he thought of what was about to unfold. That night, the streetlights shimmered across Ravenwood, but true darkness was looming over one family. A cold wind swept through the deserted streets, like the whispers of fate. A fateful night had begun, and no one could foresee the tragedy that was waiting. On the morning of October 16th, 2017, the autumn sunlight spread across Ravenwood, bringing a rare sense of peace. However, in the heart of Paul White, father of Aria Harris, a deep, inexplicable worry was growing. He had woken up early, haunted by a feeling of unease. This had started the previous evening when he visited his daughter's house and sensed that something was not right. Unable to shake off the concern, Paul decided to drop by his daughter's house again to check on things. When he arrived at the front door, he noticed an unusual silence. Upon entering, he saw Stephen Harris still lying in bed, covered with a blanket, seemingly still asleep. Paul thought Stephen might be exhausted from the festival the night before, but Aria and his two granddaughters were nowhere to be seen. Paul sighed, thinking that Aria might have taken the children to school early. He closed the door and left, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling. However, throughout the morning, the worry within him only grew stronger. In the late afternoon, as the sun's heat began to wane, Paul decided to return to the Harris family home once more. Upon arriving, an immediate sense of unease settled over him. The house was eerily silent, with not a single sound to be heard, the quietness sending a shiver down his spine. A dark premonition welled up inside him, causing his heart to race. He stepped inside, and the cold air seemed to wrap around him. As he entered Stephen's bedroom, he saw his son-in-law lying still, unmoving. Paul called out several times, but there was no response. His worry quickly turned into genuine fear. With the trembling hands, he pulled back the blanket. A blood-curdling scream tore through the silence of the house. Before him lay Stephen's lifeless body, his face pale and marked by deep wounds. Paul could not believe his eyes. The room seemed to spin around him, and the only sound left was his heavy, labored breathing. In the confined space, struggling to stay calm, he ran outside and screamed for help. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the Harris home was crowded with people. Everyone was shocked and horrified by what they saw. The police were called and quickly cordoned off the area, instructing everyone to keep their distance as they began their investigation. The detectives entered, meticulously examining every corner of the house. They soon discovered that not only was Stephen dead, but there were also 3 other bodies hidden under the bed in another bedroom. It was Aria and their 2 daughters. The scene was horrific. Blood was splattered everywhere, indicating a fierce struggle before the victims were killed. But something was not right. There were no signs of disturbance or forced entry. The doors were intact, and everything seemed to be in its place. This led the detectives to suspect that the killer might have been someone familiar with the Harris family, possibly someone from the town itself. As the detectives scoured every corner of the crime scene, the residents of Ravenwood began whispering about strange occurrences. Some recalled that Andrew Clark had been acting oddly recently. They gossiped about his dark past, from his involvement in fights to the time he was jailed for assault. The rumors spread like wildfire, and many began to murmur that Andrew was the prime suspect. At that moment, Andrew was sitting in a small cafe on the corner, his expression calm, as if nothing had happened. He listened to the stories about the recent murders, occasionally smirking, showing no signs of worry or fear. His indifferent attitude only added to the unease of those around him. Although there was no concrete evidence, the suspicious gazes of the townspeople gradually turned toward Andrew, who had recently been released with a violent past. The police quickly narrowed down the suspects in town, and Andrew became a primary focus of their surveillance. However, Andrew's calm and confident demeanor puzzled everyone. There were no signs that he was scared or remorseful. Was Andrew truly involved in the Harris family massacre? Or was he simply a cold-hearted individual capable of acting normal even in the face of death? The case became more complicated as the police continued their investigation, uncovering several unusual details in the way the crime scene was arranged. Small but significant clues slowly began to surface, bringing the detectives closer to the truth. But would these details be enough to expose the killer, or would they lead them down a dead-end path of suspicion? Andrew, once considered a promising young man, had now become the nightmare of the Harris family and the entire town of Ravenwood. But to truly understand Andrew and his possible motives, one must look back at his complex past. In the early 2010s, specifically in 2012, Andrew Clark was a strong, agile young man with sharp eyes and a charming smile. He was the only son of a working-class family in the town of Ravenwood. However, unlike his peers, Andrew always carried an air of arrogance, concealed beneath a friendly exterior. He frequently engaged in drinking and gambling with a bad crowd. Despite warnings from his family and neighbors, Andrew was confident that he could control everything, oblivious to the potential dangers lurking ahead. Everything began to unravel on a winter night in 2015. After drinking with a few friends, Andrew got into an argument with another young man in the group. In a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, Andrew lost control and pulled out a knife, attacking the other person and causing serious injuries. The police quickly arrived on the scene, and Andrew was arrested. As a result, he was sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in prison for intentional assault. This was Andrew's first taste of life behind bars, but instead of changing him, the months in prison only made him more stubborn and arrogant. When Andrew was released in 2017, he was no longer the cheerful young man he once was. Instead, he had become cold, withdrawn, and distant from everyone in town. The arrogance was still there, but now it was hidden beneath a dark and menacing exterior. The smile that once graced his face was gone, replaced by cold, soulless eyes as he walked by Ravenwood. The town that had once been his peaceful home now felt like a place where Andrew no longer belonged, and the townspeople gradually distanced themselves from him more than ever. Things took a turn for the worse in 2015 when a fateful night changed Andrew Clark's life forever. On a winter evening, Andrew ran into Matthew Anderson, his childhood friend, and at a small bar in Ravenwood. They sat together, drinking and reminiscing about old memories until late into the night. As both men became heavily intoxicated, Matthew, in absolute trust, handed over his car keys to Andrew, asking him to drive him home. But instead of fulfilling that promise, Andrew decided to drive to Matthew's house on his own. When he arrived, he found only Chloe Martin and Matthew's wife and their 2 young children at home. In that moment, dark thoughts began to creep into Andrew's mind. He knew Chloe was the wife of the friend he had just been drinking with, but that didn't stop the lust and anger he had long suppressed. Andrew stealthily broke into the house, using force to overpower Chloe, then dragged her to a secluded area nearby, where he committed a heinous act in the thick darkness. For Chloe, it was the most terrifying night of her life. As dawn broke, Chloe returned home in a state of shock, her clothes torn and her spirit utterly shattered. Matthew, still drunk from the night before, had no idea of the horror that had befallen his family. When he discovered what had happened, he was devastated, unable to believe that such a tragedy could strike his loved ones. His heart was filled with unspeakable rage and anguish. But before Matthew could do anything, Andrew was arrested by the police. He was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison for the assault. The entire town of Ravenwood was shaken by the incident. Andrew became the town's enemy, with no one wanting anything to do with him. However, for Andrew, his time in prison only made him harder and more brutal. He was no longer the arrogant young man he once was, but had become a man filled with hatred, eager to exact revenge on everyone who had pushed him down this dark path. On July 27th, 2017, Andrew Clark was released from prison. He returned to the town of Ravenwood, carrying with him a heart full of hatred and a desire for revenge. His return not only stirred up anxiety among many in the town, but also made the atmosphere there heavier than ever. Chloe Martin and Matthew Anderson, the victims of the previous incident, were particularly distressed. Chloe had tried to forget her dark past, but Andrew's presence brought back the terrifying memories, haunting her every night. She felt scared every time she had to walk past Andrew's house, unable to look him in the eye, and Matthew wasn't much better. Though he tried to appear strong, his heart was filled with unease. Andrew, noticing the fear in Chloe's eyes, felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. He knew that his presence made their family live in constant fear, and that gave him a strange pleasure. Not content with just silent threats, Andrew even openly declared that one day he would kill their entire family. These words were not just impulsive threats made in anger. They were genuine expressions of the dark intentions deep within him. However, when people heard these words, they dismissed them as outbursts of anger, not realizing that Andrew was truly plotting to carry them out. After Andrew's return, the atmosphere in Ravenwood grew even more tense. Chloe lived in fear every day, not daring to go out alone, always on edge at any sound around the house. Matthew, though outwardly calm, was also filled with worry. He had considered taking his family out of town to escape Andrew, but due to work and his responsibilities to his children, he had to stay, clinging to the faint hope that things would eventually settle down. Meanwhile, the Ravenwood police, after receiving reports about the tension in the town, began to reinvestigate Andrew's dark past. The memories of Chloe's assault in 2015 were gradually brought back to light. The police realized that Andrew had a clear motive to continue harassing Chloe and Matthew's family, but to charge him, they needed more than just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. However, the police knew that Andrew was not someone who would easily fall into a trap. He had spent time in prison and knew well how to cover his tracks. Therefore, they decided to conduct the investigation carefully and patiently, not overlooking even the smallest details. They needed to find conclusive evidence, an undeniable trace, or even a confession from Andrew himself to bring him to justice and protect the safety of the town of Ravenwood. On September 21st, 2017, the police decided to arrest Andrew Clark. He was taken to the station with a calm and cold demeanor, showing no surprise or concern. As he was handcuffed, Andrew knew this moment would come, but he was mentally prepared and remained unflinching. In his mind, a plan had already been laid out, and he was confident that he could escape the law's grasp once again. As he entered the interrogation room, Andrew sat down comfortably, as if he were sitting in his own living room. His cold, sharp eyes scanned the officers seated across from him without a hint of hesitation. The interrogation room's light shone directly down, casting deep shadows on his face, making Andrew's expression even more intimidating. Detective Mark Thomas, the lead investigator on the case, began the interrogation. He was well prepared, knowing that he was facing an experienced criminal who would not easily be subdued. Mark started with simple questions, asking Andrew to recount in detail from the moment he left the wedding party until he got home. Andrew, in a monotone voice, began his account. He claimed that after leaving the party around 9 p.m., he drove to a nearby area and met with a prostitute he regularly contacted. Andrew asserted that he was with her from 10 p.m. until 3 a.m. on September 21st and did not leave that location. Andrew spoke with an unusual confidence, as if he had rehearsed every answer. Each time Mark asked for more details, Andrew responded quickly and without hesitation. However, Andrew's confidence did not fool Mark. He noticed inconsistencies in Andrew's story. For instance, when asked for the prostitute's name, Andrew hesitated briefly before providing a name. His eyes flickered, as if he was carefully considering what to say. Mark took note of this, recognizing it as a potential weakness in Andrew's testimony. The police decided to subject Andrew Clark to a second, more intense interrogation. The questions came rapidly, drilling into every minute detail of that night. Detective Mark Thomas relentlessly pressured Andrew to repeat his story multiple times, hoping that fatigue might cause him to slip up, but Andrew maintained his composure, even appearing defiant as he answered. He smirked as he noticed the detectives beginning to lose their patience. However, as the interrogation stretched late into the night, Andrew's confidence began to wane. Mark's relentless, unending questions had worn him down. Signs of strain started to show. His voice was no longer as steady as before, and his eyes gradually lost their sharpness. Andrew had to repeat his story so many times that minor details, such as times and locations, began to blur. Mark realized that despite Andrew being an experienced criminal, he had a weakness. His arrogance and overconfidence could be the key to breaking him down. The interrogation reached a critical point when Mark suddenly asked, "You threatened to kill Matthew Anderson's entire family after you were released from prison, didn't you?" Andrew was momentarily thrown off. He hadn't expected this question at that moment. However, he quickly regained his composure, denying it with a casual tone. "I did say that, but it was just something said in anger. Who doesn't say stupid things when they're mad? Mark didn't respond, only silently stared at Andrew for a few seconds, as if weighing his words. The silence made Andrew uneasy. He shifted in his seat, trying to maintain his composure, but inside, a sense of anxiety began to rise. Despite numerous signs pointing to Andrew as the perpetrator, the police struggled to find concrete evidence to charge him. Andrew had constructed a fairly solid alibi, and without clear evidence, they couldn't hold him for more than 24 hours. Detective Mark knew that Andrew was playing a psychological game with them, and he was winning. The interrogation dragged on until the early morning hours, but the police still couldn't uncover any additional clues. Even so, they couldn't ignore the minor inconsistencies in Andrew's statements, but those inconsistencies weren't enough to keep him longer. As the detention period neared its end, the police were forced to release Andrew Clark, a decision they were unhappy with but had no choice. After being released from the station, Andrew returned to Ravenwood with a smug smile. He walked through the morning sunlight as if nothing could shake his confidence. However, deep down, Andrew couldn't deny that he was feeling uneasy. He knew that the police wouldn't give up easily and that they were likely still watching him closely. Andrew decided he had to act as normal as possible to not raise any further suspicion. He began returning to his daily routine, doing the things he used to do before being arrested. He visited his usual cafe, chatted with a few townspeople, and even participated in chess games with the elderly in the park. People looked at Andrew with strange eyes, but he remained calm, joking around, and didn't show any signs of unease. However, Andrew knew that even though he had erased all traces, the police were still waiting. They were waiting for a slip-up, the slightest sign to bring him back to the station. He tried to maintain a calm exterior, but the tension within him grew stronger each day. The police didn't have to do much. Just their presence was enough to make Andrew uneasy. They didn't stop at merely watching him from a distance. They began employing psychological tactics to put pressure on him. Late-night phone calls, soft but haunting knocks on his door, all were meant to make Andrew lose his composure. They even used townspeople to deliberately talk about the murders in front of Andrew, hoping to make him nervous and reveal a mistake. One night, when the tension reached its peak, Andrew Clark decided to revisit the crime scene to ensure that he hadn't left any trace of himself behind. He stealthily returned to the Harris family home where he had committed the crime. It was the first time he had been back since that fateful night. The psychological game Andrew believed he could control had now spiraled out of his grasp. He was no longer the confident predator, but had become the prey in his own game. As Andrew entered the Harris family's home, the cold, silent atmosphere sent an indescribable chill down his spine. He moved quietly, checking every corner of the rooms, every drawer, to make sure nothing had been overlooked. The thick darkness enveloped him, with only the faint light from a small flashlight in Andrew's hand illuminating his steps. However, as he searched the house, Andrew had no idea he was being watched. The police had set a trap, waiting for him to return to the scene of the crime. As Andrew stepped out of the bedroom, a bright flashlight suddenly shone directly into his face, startling him. Detectives, led by Detective Mark Thomas, emerged from every corner of the house, blocking all possible exits. Andrew's face turned pale as panic flooded his mind. He knew he had made a grave mistake and that there was no way out now. Detective Thomas approached Andrew, his cold eyes locking onto the criminal. "Did you really think you could get away, Andrew? You made a big mistake coming back here," Thomas said calmly but with commanding authority. Andrew tried to maintain his composure, but his body trembled uncontrollably. He knew the truth had been exposed, and there was no way to hide his crime any longer. Andrew was handcuffed and led back to the police station in silence. He sat in the interrogation room, facing Detective Thomas and a team of investigators. This time, he could no longer maintain the confidence he once had. Mark began the interrogation with sharp questions, probing why Andrew had returned to the crime scene and what traces he thought he had erased. Each question was like a knife cutting deeper into Andrew's mind, pushing him closer to breaking down. Finally, after hours of intense questioning, Andrew could no longer hold out. He began to confess to his crimes, step by step revealing the details of that fateful night. With a trembling voice, Andrew recounted how, after leaving the fall festival, a surge of hatred had filled his heart. He couldn't stop thinking about what the Harris family had done to his life, and in that dark moment, he decided that the only way to escape his past was through revenge. Andrew recounted in detail how he had snuck into the quiet Harris family home, attacking each member while they slept, and how he tried to cover up his crimes afterward. He described every step in his frenzied state, driven by hatred that had overtaken his reason. As he finished his confession, Andrew lowered his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought killing them would free me from my past, but I was wrong. Everything just got worse," he said, his eyes staring blankly into the void before him. The police silently recorded his entire statement, knowing they now had enough evidence to convict Andrew in court. The case quickly went to trial, and Andrew was sentenced to death for murder with aggravating circumstances. The family of Stephen Harris was granted justice. But the emotional scars would never fully heal. The town of Ravenwood remained haunted by the case. With the peace that once existed now shattered, the name Andrew Clark became a source of fear for every resident. A stark reminder of the cruelty that could lie hidden within seemingly harmless individuals. Yet the painful memories of the case lingered in every corner of Ravenwood. The town's elders, when recounting the story to their children and grandchildren, spoke of Andrew as a reminder of the consequences of hatred and the harsh price of evil. On stormy nights, as dim lights flickered in small houses, the story of Andrew was retold as a cautionary tale, reminding everyone that evil never prevails and that justice will ultimately be served. As time passed, Ravenwood gradually regained its peace. New homes were built, and younger generations grew up with the hope that the painful memories would eventually fade. But in the hearts of the townspeople, the name Andrew Clark would forever be an indelible mark. It was a lesson in hatred and a testament to the inevitable punishment of justice. Andrew's end serves as a warning, not just to those who might consider doing evil, but as a reminder to all that no matter how dark it gets, the light of justice will ultimately shine through, and every crime will be punished. Accordingly, Ravenwood stands strong, with people who have come to understand the true value of peace and are determined to protect it with all their strength and love. Our story ends here today. What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below the video. If you enjoyed it, give us a like, share it, and help us stay motivated to create more videos. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you next time.